Well, the virus has now killed more than 100 people in China, and new cases have been confirmed around the world.
So you don't want to frighten the American public.
France and South Korea have also got evacuation plans.
But you need to prepare for and assume
strongly warning Americans to avoid all non-essential travel to China.
That this is going to be a real serious problem.
France, Australia, Canada, the US, Singapore, Cambodia, Vietnam, the list goes on.
Health officials are investigating more than 100 possible cases in the U.S.
Germany, a man has contracted the virus.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
Japan, where a bus driver contracted the virus.
Coronavirus has killed more than 100 people there and infected more than 4,500.
We have to prepare for the worst, always, because if you don't and the worst happens...
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Okay, I want to welcome everybody back. It's Wednesday, the 9th of June, the year of our Lord 2021. You're in the War Room. We're on every distribution platform in the world. You can go to warroom.org. You can get all the different apps, whether it's Real America's Voice, all the other different apps. You take your pick, get in one, get in a chat room, get to give us commentary. We monitor it nonstop for what people is going on. So make sure you go to warroom.org. Raheem, is that anything else we should add about how people get access to the show before we bring our next guest?
Oh, I just think people really need to subscribe on Rumble as well. It's such a great and growing platform. I know that there's much more in the pipeline for Rumble and live broadcasts and all of that. And we have such a large account there that I want people to be able to go there and share things and be a part of that community too.
Fantastic. Also, is a big one on Telegram too, I think. Also, so you got Telegram, you got Rumble. Just go to warroom.org. I think we've got them all up that you can get there. So the Real America's Voice got a great community. These cadres, posses, and communities are building every day, and that's what we're trying to do: is give people a centerpiece. We provide the information. You guys, you take it. It's action, action, action. So there's so much going on. We're going to get to in this hour. We want to pivot because we want to do signal and not noise. For this second hour about a topic that's coming up. If you look downrange, we haven't gotten to the firestorm. The firestorm over masks, the firestorm over critical race theory in the schools, right? What has led to this taking the country back village by village, school board by school board. Dan Schultz's precinct committeeman strategy, and everyone in the audience has to go to precinctstrategy.com. If you want to become a patriot like happened in South Carolina and in Georgia, and reach out to people in these chat rooms, ask the people, and people in Georgia, I know there was thousands there that were War Room things. Please go into the chat rooms. Please go into the live chats and give your experiences. Tell people what it's like and tell people how it feels to be empowered where you're actually in charge. That's what's happening in this country. We want to give you signal, not noise, because the main event hasn't arrived. The main event is now upon us, and that main event is the vaccines and the vaccine passports. And I'm not an anti-vaxxer, okay? First off, as a kid, but more importantly, in the military, you didn't really have a choice. So I know a lot of anti-vaxxers. I hear the arguments. I'm certainly vaccine hesitant, right? Because I don't actually understand the logic of what they're talking about, right? Of how they actually get there. Particularly when you're talking about people that have had now they're admitting if you've had the virus before, you don't need it, but it just seems to me so much misinformation. It's such a forced way they're trying to get people incentivized, even by giving $1 million, free college, and of course the vaccine rates are collapsing. That's why you're going to see this fall, and Fauci, we're the ones that broke it on that AP story. Fauci saying, hey, the kids are all going to be, the 12 to 15s are going to start being vaccinated as soon as they get back to school. And his quote, the children will be vaccinated by the end of the year, and that'll get them up to the herd immunity because you need 80 or 90% of the people vaxxed. Whereas they don't calculate the basic thing of herd immunity from the very first day of the show was the natural immunity that builds up from having the virus. So it's nothing but a constant bombardment of information that just doesn't make sense. And that's where the common sense of the American people are going to say, hey, and that's where you're seeing these mothers stand up now for the mask situation and for critical race theory. You have not seen the firestorm when you start to either have forced vaccinations of the children or the children are kind of othered by not having the vaccination. So we want to get back to it. And that's the first guest. We reached out, somebody we've kind of studied what everything he said online and other things. It's Mike Yeadon. Joins us from England. He was on the other day. Mike, just to start off with, because we always like to tell people, hey, if it's about the election, fraud. We want to make sure it's in a court case or make sure it's something sanctioned by a state legislature. It's just not people on YouTube or people throwing out concepts and ideas. This actually has a place to adjudicate it. We have to show evidence. I want to make sure, you worked at Pfizer, but I want you to walk through briefly your academic background, your work at Pfizer, and then afterwards you started your own company, I think sold it for $350 million, a biotech company. Walk through your bona fides in this area, sir.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you very much, Steve, for having me back again. So yes, Dr. Mike Eden. My first degree is a joint honours biochemistry and toxicology. And I got not just a first class honours, I got the highest first class the university ever awarded. I followed that by a 3-year research-based PhD. That was respiratory pharmacology. It was partly funded actually by the military. After that PhD, I worked for 7 years at the Wellcome Research Labs until they merged with Glaxo, which went on to become GSK. And at that time, I went to Pfizer in the UK, and I was there 17 years. I finished as their vice president and chief scientist of allergy and respiratory research. So I was responsible for the worldwide research and development up to clinical proof of concept across the whole company. And then after that, I left them 10 years ago, on very good terms, by the way. I loved working with Pfizer. For the last 10 years, 5 of those years, I started, raised all the money for, and led as CEO a biotech called Xiarco. We acquired a compound from my former portfolio at Pfizer that was surplus. We converted it into a dermatology asset, and we sold it to Novartis, the world's biggest drug company, for roughly $350 million. At least that's the rumored sum. I'm not allowed to tell you the actual sum, but it was pretty good. And then along in that 10 years, I've consulted to 30 startup biotech companies, 2 of which are now public: Apellis Pharmaceuticals and Pulmatrix.
So if I had, as an investment banker, my Goldman Sachs hat, if we had to reach out to a consultant on an M&A project, you would consider yourself to be among the top practitioners in the world, not just theoreticians in the universities, but people that actually go to work for these big pharmaceutical companies and actually have to take theoretical science and use applied research to actually get products in the field, correct? That is, I would take it, your specialty?
Yeah, absolutely. So we originated programs in-house, but I also led for 10 years the in-licensing team at Pfizer. So we reviewed 100 companies in that 10 years, and we did 3 deals.
Perfect. This is okay. My point. This is a guy that's not some guy up on YouTube talking smack. This is one of the top professionals in the world from the heart of the industry. This is what we call a subject matter expert with credentials that cannot be questioned, because they're so on every level, whether it's the academic background, the years at the big corporations, grinding it out, going out as an entrepreneur, really doing a lot what he did in the lab, creating a great company, selling, and everyone, whether it's Glaxo or Wellcome or Novartis or Pfizer, this is the creme de la creme. You're playing at the highest level. Okay? So, Dr. Mike Eden, I then want to go through, make your case about your problem as a professional about this whole vaccine problem, how it originated, where we stand, and where you think it's headed, sir.
Yeah, certainly. I'll do that quickly. So I'm very pro-vaccines. I'm particularly pro-safe medicines. And my biggest beef with the vaccines includes serious concerns about safety. But I've just got 3 points to make about the vaccines. In absolute honesty, I don't think they're even necessary. Why are they not necessary? Well, that's because there are at least 4 or 5 safe and effective medicines, and their presence has been suppressed and hidden from the public. So they're not really necessary. The next is, it's not even clear if they're effective enough. The trials have been done in a really strange way, where they used, say, PCR positivity as the end point with 1 minor symptom. So most people think if a vaccine works, it saves you from serious disease or death, and those things were not measured in the trial. So I'm not saying they don't work. I'm saying the data is not clear. And then finally, they have not been sufficiently tested. They have been approved for emergency use, fraudulently in my view, because they shouldn't do it if there are safe and effective medicines, and there are. They've just been hidden. So it's an emergency use only, and that means they've been plucked from the middle of late stage development. They've still got about 1.5 years of clinical phase to run and they normally collect safety information as well as efficacy information. We don't have that data because we're already out inoculating 1 billion people. But along the way, we've gathered some safety concerns, Steve.
Okay, hang on a second, Dr. I want to go back to something, because you come from the industry and you've actually made money on things that relate to vaccines. You say you're pro-vaccine, right? You're not an anti-vaxxer crusader.
Absolutely.
You're not even vaccine hesitant if it's proper. But I want to go back to your first point, because this is where people say, hey, I see on TV and I see all these prominent scientists and they work with all these big companies and they seem like solid citizens, and in the managerial expert world we live in, they're presented by experts, by NBC and CNN and Time Warner and the New York Times and all that, expert after expert. I want to go back to your first point. You said it was suppressed. What are the 2 or 3 things you think work? Why do you think they work? And why were they suppressed?
Okay, so hydroxychloroquine is a very common one, and it reduces viral replication. So when it's given at the early stages of infection, it definitely reduces the viral load in a person, makes it less likely they will progress. Sometimes they add zinc as well, because the hydroxychloroquine works by letting zinc into cells. Another major one is ivermectin, which is an off-patent antiparasitic. It also happens to have antiviral effects as well. Then the last 2, I guess, would be azithromycin, which is an off-patent antimicrobial, but it also has anti-inflammatory properties, which we know about. And then finally, inhaled steroids like budesonide that are commonly used in asthma. If you have those 4 drugs, Dr. Peter McCullen believes that almost no one who isn't right at the end of life needs to die of this virus. And why have they been suppressed? Steve, I don't know, but I think it's part of a fraud. I was on last week and I told you that all the main narrative points about the virus are, so we say, adjacent to the truth, lies, frankly, designed to make people fearful. And I think suppressing the drugs, the treatments, has had 2 benefits for whoever is doing this. One is it makes people willing to take the vaccine, and it makes vaccines available much earlier than they otherwise would and should have been. So that's probably the motivation.
Let me add, what, because look, some of our stuff was taken down back in the spring, and we would have some of the experts on here about hydroxy, ivermectin, the very things you're talking about, not the steroids, but the first 3. We'd be taking down our Twitter account for. How did the social media companies? What was their rationale, and what expert opinions did you ever hear of people that could back up everything that this was all voodoo, witchcraft, dangerous?
Yeah, I wasn't very close to this while it was going on. I was focusing last year on PCR testing, but I had a very good friend, a physician, Dr. Tess Laurie in the UK, and she was reporting that they were writing up reviews of collected clinical information from around the world, and it was clear in her case that ivermectin was working really well, and they were literally suppressing the manuscripts at journal level. So I'm talking about medical journals that you would think of as being beyond reproach. Someone was leaning on them and refusing to publish papers that were written to at least the same quality as everything else they were publishing. So I'm afraid it was just they were tortured. But
Dr. Yeadon, we always talk. Science goes forward today with peer-reviewed journals. That's kind of the high priesthood. It's kind of the high priesthood of scientific knowledge. How could the high priesthood be corrupted? Because essentially what you're saying is even at that level, that there was suppression from outside. What outside forces do you believe? We got about 30 seconds. What outside forces do you think got into the temple?
I think journals have been provided with a lot of money, sometimes actually acquired by interests that are now being manifest. And almost all scientists everywhere outside of industry, if they're in universities, they have to beg, steal and borrow for their grants. So all the major granting bodies are also, I think, part of the pressurizing of this system. Scientific review only works when you release the pressure, and there's a lot of pressure on these people.
Okay, we're going to take a short commercial break. We're going to return with Dr. Michael Yeadon. Mike Yeadon was a senior scientist at Pfizer, one of the senior researchers, chief scientist for a number of areas, impeccable credentials. We're going to return with his thoughts on the coming vaccine crisis next in the War Room.
We will fight till they're all gone. We rejoice when there's no more. Let's Take me.